In this episode, we look at how security teams decide which vulnerabilities deserve attention first, because finding weaknesses is only part of the job. A scan, assessment, or penetration test may produce dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of findings. If every finding is treated as equally urgent, the organization can become overwhelmed and may spend time on lower-risk issues while serious exposure remains open. Prioritization is the process of deciding what should be fixed first based on severity, exploitability, exposure, asset criticality, and business impact. This is where vulnerability management becomes more realistic. A weakness on an internet-facing system that handles customer logins may matter more than the same weakness on a disconnected lab machine. A technically severe issue may matter less if it cannot be reached or exploited in the actual environment. Good prioritization helps teams use limited time wisely and reduce the most meaningful risk first. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Severity is often the first clue people notice in a vulnerability report. A finding may be labeled critical, high, medium, low, or informational. Those labels are useful because they give a quick starting point, but they should not be the only factor. A critical vulnerability usually means the weakness could have serious consequences if exploited. It might allow remote code execution, privilege escalation, authentication bypass, sensitive data exposure, or full system compromise. A high-severity issue may also be serious, but perhaps with more conditions or less direct impact. Medium and low findings may still matter, especially when many small weaknesses combine into a larger path. Informational findings may not require urgent remediation, but they can still improve understanding. Severity helps you sort the pile, but it does not automatically tell you the exact order of action. Context turns severity into priority. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, is often used to describe the technical severity of known vulnerabilities. A CVSS score considers factors such as how the vulnerability can be exploited, how complex exploitation is, whether privileges are required, whether user interaction is needed, and what impact exploitation could have on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This gives organizations a more consistent way to compare technical risk across many findings. A vulnerability with a high CVSS score deserves attention, but the score is not the whole story. The score may describe the vulnerability in general, not the way it appears in your exact environment. A high-scoring vulnerability on a system that is turned off, isolated, or protected by strong compensating controls may not be the top priority. A lower-scoring issue on a highly exposed critical system may need faster action. Exploitability asks whether a vulnerability can realistically be used by an attacker. Some vulnerabilities are theoretically serious but difficult to exploit. Others are easy to exploit with publicly available tools. If attackers are already exploiting a vulnerability in the wild, that raises urgency. If exploit code is widely available, that also increases risk because more attackers can attempt it. Exploitability may depend on conditions such as network access, authentication, user interaction, system configuration, or chain weaknesses. For example, a vulnerability that requires local access may be less urgent than one that can be exploited remotely from the internet, assuming all other factors are equal. A vulnerability that requires an administrator account may be less immediately dangerous than one that requires no credentials at all. Prioritization improves when teams ask not only how bad the weakness could be, but also how likely exploitation is in the current environment. Exposure is about how reachable the vulnerable asset is. An internet-facing system is usually more exposed than a system available only on a restricted internal network. A public application used by customers is more exposed than a test server behind several layers of access control. A vulnerable service reachable from every workstation creates more risk than the same service reachable only from a tightly controlled management network. Exposure can also include cloud permissions, remote access paths, partner connections, wireless reach, and access through compromised accounts. Attackers usually start where they can reach. That does not mean internal vulnerabilities are safe, because attackers who gain a foothold may move inward. Still, exposure helps decide urgency. If a vulnerable service can be reached from the internet today, and the vulnerability is actively exploited, that finding should usually move near the top of the remediation list. Asset criticality asks how important the affected system, application, device, or data is to the organization. A vulnerability on a domain controller, payment system, identity platform, production database, backup server, or security monitoring tool may deserve more urgency than the same vulnerability on a low-value training system. Critical assets support essential operations or protect sensitive information. If they fail or are compromised, the organization may face major disruption, data exposure, financial harm, safety concerns, or loss of trust. Asset criticality depends on business context. A small internal application may be critical if it controls manufacturing, scheduling, billing, or emergency communications. A public website may be less critical if it contains only static public information and no sensitive data. Security teams need asset owners and business leaders to help determine criticality, because technical teams may not always know which systems matter most to operations. Business impact connects technical findings to real consequences. A vulnerability is not just a line in a report. It may create the possibility of customer data exposure, service outage, fraud, regulatory penalties, lost revenue, reputational damage, safety risk, or operational delay. Business impact helps leaders understand why one fix should come before another. For example, a vulnerability that could expose employee payroll records may have privacy and legal consequences. A weakness that could stop an online ordering system during a peak season may create direct revenue loss. A flaw in a medical, industrial, or transportation system may raise safety concerns. Even a moderate technical issue can become urgent if the business impact is high. The opposite can also be true. A technically severe issue may be less urgent if the affected asset has no sensitive data, no business role, and limited exposure. Prioritization also considers compensating controls. A compensating control is a safeguard that reduces risk when the underlying vulnerability cannot be fixed immediately. For example, if a patch cannot be applied right away, the organization might restrict network access, disable a vulnerable feature, increase monitoring, place a web application firewall in front of an application, or require stronger authentication. These controls do not erase the vulnerability, but they may reduce the likelihood or impact of exploitation. This can affect priority when teams have limited remediation capacity. A critical vulnerability with no compensating controls and active exploitation may need immediate action. A similar vulnerability behind strong segmentation, with no known exploit path and a patch scheduled soon, may still be serious but slightly less urgent. The important point is to document the reasoning. Compensating controls should be deliberate, temporary when appropriate, and verified. Penetration test reports require careful review because they often show how weaknesses can be combined into an attack path. A penetration test is different from a vulnerability scan because human testers try to think and act like attackers within an agreed scope. They may begin with a small weakness, use it to gain access, then pivot to another system, escalate privileges, capture credentials, or reach sensitive data. A single finding may look moderate by itself, but the report may show that it was part of a path to a serious outcome. This is why you should not read penetration test findings as isolated items only. Look for the story. What did the testers start with? What did they reach? Which controls failed? Which assumptions were wrong? Which business process or data set was ultimately exposed? That path often tells you more than a severity label alone. A good penetration test report usually includes findings, evidence, impact, affected systems, risk ratings, and recommendations. It may also include an executive summary that explains the business meaning of the test. When reviewing the report, do not treat every finding as equal. Start by identifying the findings that enabled the most serious outcomes. If testers gained administrative access because of weak passwords, missing patches, and excessive privileges, the organization should address the chain, not only the final symptom. If testers reached sensitive data through a misconfigured cloud storage location, the priority may include fixing that storage issue, reviewing similar resources, improving cloud posture management, and strengthening access review. The report should lead to action. It is not enough to say the test found problems. The organization should assign owners, set deadlines, track remediation, and confirm that fixes actually remove the attack path. Penetration test evidence should be read carefully. Screenshots, command output, accessed records, captured hashes, session details, and tester notes can help prove that a finding is real. Evidence also helps technical teams reproduce and fix the issue. At the same time, evidence should be handled safely because it may contain sensitive information. A report might include internal addresses, usernames, system details, data samples, or proof that access was achieved. That report should not be distributed casually. Reviewing evidence also helps distinguish between a theoretical issue and a demonstrated risk. If testers prove that a vulnerability allowed access to a sensitive system, that finding deserves more attention than a generic warning with no demonstrated path. For security plus thinking, penetration test reports are not just lists. They are validated observations about how an attacker could move through the environment. Prioritization should include remediation effort, but effort should not be used as an excuse to ignore serious risk. Some fixes are quick, such as disabling an unused service, correcting an exposed setting, or removing a stale account. Others require testing, change windows, vendor support, application updates, or business approval. Quick wins can reduce risk fast, but the organization should avoid spending all its time on easy low-risk items while major exposure remains open. A balanced approach may address urgent critical findings immediately, schedule complex high-risk fixes with clear deadlines, and complete low-effort improvements when they do not distract from higher priorities. Remediation planning should also consider dependencies. Patching one server may require updating an application, coordinating downtime, or confirming backup readiness. Good prioritization is practical. It accounts for risk, effort, ownership, and timing without losing sight of what could hurt the organization most. Communication matters because prioritization often involves disagreement. A technical team may focus on exploit details. A business owner may focus on downtime risk. A compliance team may focus on regulatory requirements. Leadership may focus on customer impact and cost. These perspectives should not be treated as obstacles. They are part of making a sound decision. A security team should explain why a finding matters in plain language. What could happen if it is exploited? How likely exploitation appears? What systems are affected? What options exist? And what deadline makes sense? This is especially important when remediation may disrupt operations. If a patch requires downtime for a critical system, leaders need enough information to approve the maintenance window. If a risk must be accepted temporarily, the acceptance should be documented and owned by the right authority, not quietly assumed by the security team. Verification closes the loop after prioritized remediation. If a team says a vulnerability was fixed, the organization should confirm it. That confirmation may involve rescanning, reviewing configuration, retesting an application, checking code changes, validating cloud settings, or asking penetration testers to perform a retest. Verification is especially important for high-priority findings because those are the weaknesses the organization believed mattered most. A closed ticket without proof can create false confidence. A patch may have failed. A configuration may have been changed on one system but missed on another. A code fix may have blocked one attack path while leaving a similar path open. For penetration test findings, retesting can confirm whether the demonstrated attack path has truly been broken. Prioritization is not finished when work is assigned. It is finished when the organization has reasonable evidence that risk was reduced. For security plus questions, look for the factor being emphasized. If the scenario focuses on technical rating, labels, or scoring, think severity and CVSS. If it focuses on whether attackers can realistically use the weakness, think exploitability. If it focuses on whether the affected system is reachable from the internet or broad internal networks, think exposure. If it focuses on how important the affected system is, think asset criticality. If it focuses on financial loss, safety, privacy, operations, reputation, or legal consequences, think business impact. If it describes a penetration test, look for attack paths and demonstrated outcomes rather than treating every finding the same. The best answer is usually the one that reduces the most meaningful risk first, not the one that blindly follows the longest report or highest number without context. The larger lesson is that prioritization turns vulnerability data into security judgment. Severity gives a useful starting point. Exploitability shows whether attackers can realistically use the weakness. Exposure shows how reachable the asset is. Asset criticality shows how much the organization depends on the affected system or data. Business impact shows what harm could follow if the weakness is exploited. Penetration test review shows how multiple issues can combine into a real attack path. Strong prioritization does not ignore technical detail, but it also does not stop there. It connects technical risk to business reality. That connection helps organizations fix the right problems first, justify difficult decisions, communicate clearly, and prove progress over time. When you can think this way, vulnerability management becomes less about reacting to every finding and more about reducing the risks that matter most.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.